Confident living, banner of might, comes from the Spirit with glorious light. Confident living cleanses my soul, giving the Spirit fullest control. Confident living.
I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes about tugboats and tunnels. Tugboats and tunnels don't seem to have a great deal in common, but many aspects of our own lives can be likened to both of these common items that we see so often in our daily lives. A number of years ago, I worked with a psychologist who had an active practice, and he said the most difficult thing that he found in his practice was getting people to change their ideas and their way of thinking. And our program is about inviting you to change your way of thinking. And by changing your way of thinking, you can change the quality of your life. Tugboats are wonderful boats, and they perform a tremendous service when you think about it. They're not very attractive, they're small, they're austere, and they're very plain. They don't go out onto the open seas, and they stay in the harbors, but they perform a very vital function. They latch on to larger boats, and they help them steer their way clear into the harbor and out of the harbor. Our lives need people who are like tugboats, and you and I need at different points in our lives to be tugboats to other people. The tugboat goes back and forth in seeming monotony, but its role is vitally and tremendously important. It helps other boats, and it does things that others can't do. Sometimes when we look out at an ocean liner on the beautiful seas, we think that that big, beautiful ocean liner has a tremendous advantage over the small tugboat. But in reality, the ocean liner brings people great pleasure, brings them happiness, and brings them a good time. But it's the tugboat that really has the responsibility of maneuvering that ship through the difficult and trying waters of the harbor and getting it safely where it needs to be. In your life, you've known people who have been tugboats. Maybe you've been called upon to be a tugboat. And in the midst of that experience, you've been able to touch others' lives, and others have been touched by your life. And it's those tugboats that have helped others to get where they need to be, and you as a tugboat that have helped to get others where they need to be as well. The tunnels of our lives are a little bit like the tunnels that we experienced as children. What is it that you think about when you remember going through a tunnel for the first time? It's dark, it's a little scary, and there isn't much in there except possibly fear. But as you move through the tunnel, you begin to see a light at the other side. And the miraculous thing about tunnels is that they bring us from one place to the other. Without a tunnel, we'd have to go around a mountain, we'd have to go over a mountain. But a tunnel allows us to go through that mountain and cuts through the time and effort that we have to get where we need to be and where we need to arrive. In our lives, we go through all kinds of tunnels. We go through the tunnels of sickness, of broken relationships, of lost jobs, of limited financial resources, of difficulties and trials. And our lives are like going through the tunnels when we were children in the car. If you remember when you saw that big black hole, you didn't really know what was in there. You didn't really know where you were going. And as soon as you moved in the car into that tunnel, everything became dark. But you knew as a child that you were going to be all right because there were people there with you who helped you and drove the car and maneuvered through that tunnel. Maybe if you were like me when you were young, you had a father or a mother who liked to honk a horn and made going through the tunnel a happy and a fun experience, so that the darkness wasn't quite as scary or as frightening as it had been in the beginning. There's some real parallels between tunnels and the problems that we have in our lives. When we go into a tunnel, we enter a darkness, And in our lives, when we have difficulty, we enter dark periods. The darkness that we feel inside our minds and hearts is very much like the darkness that enveloped you when you went into your first tunnel. When cars go into a tunnel, the first thing that they do is turn on their lights. As they turn on their lights, there is an illumination that goes out before them. And all of us have the ability to turn on our lights, if you will, in knowing that there is a dynamic spiritual power, a magnificent resource that will guide and direct our way. And that realization allows us to turn on the headlights, if you will, and to see into the darkness. When we turn the headlights on of a car, we begin through the process of that tunnel. Those lights only illuminate a certain distance. And that's the way the divine principle of life operates in your life and mine. That illumination guides our way for a certain distance before us, but not infinitely before us. But as we move through the darkness, we come closer and closer to the end of that tunnel. And at the end of that tunnel, there is a bright and radiant illumination. There is radiant clearness of light and being. And so it is in the experiences that we have in our lives that challenge us, that bring us difficulty. The darkness is illuminated by the faith that we have of the God power within us, the reality of God residing within us to guide and direct us, and then the light of day into which we come when that experience passes. Tunnels are made for going through. We very seldom ever remember going into a tunnel and backing up. A tunnel is a one-way road, and that's the way the tunnels of our lives are as well. The difficult times are circumstances and situations into which we move. And as we move into them, even though the darkness seems to envelop us, even though the difficulty seems to be great, we know that we are moving ever forward. And as we move forward, we are pulled into the radiant light of divine presence, guidance, and direction. I don't know what challenges you face or what difficulties you have, but I know that in your life, as in mine and all of our lives, we are faced with times when we have difficulties, when we have hurts and pain and anguish, when we're faced with illness, when we lose that job, when a child fails us, when a relationship ends. All of those challenges call upon us the resource that we need to experience the going through the tunnels and the need that we have to be guided and directed by the divine light that brings us out of these experiences into the radiance of day. A tugboat can pull us, the light can draw us. Both of these resources are available for us in the form of divine ideas and illumination and direction that comes from the power and the light of God connecting with our mind. In New Thought, we talk a lot about divine mind. Divine mind is a principle, an idea that allows us to picture the reality of divinity as divine intelligence, all-knowing intelligence. And we believe that that divine intelligence can connect with our human mind. And when human mind connects with divine mind, we have a tremendous and magnificent resource. Divine mind is like that tugboat. Divine mind connects to our mind to pull us out of the depths of difficulty, to steer us through the troubled waters of life. It is that divine mind that creates for us a magnificent illumination that is at the end of every tunnel. We believe that each time we enter into a dark experience, a difficult experience, that the divine mind of God will guide and direct us to action, to knowledge, and to awareness, so that we may know the way in which we should go to be guided and directed out of that circumstance or situation. Whether you need a tugboat because you're on troubled waters, or whether you're entering a tunnel, you need to know that the reality is that God's infinite love for you and the access that you have to divine intelligence can guide and direct your life in every aspect of your being. By changing the way that you think, you can change the quality of your life, because we live in our minds and not in the world. It isn't the circumstances and situations that take place. It isn't what people do or say that really impact your life. It is how you think about what it is they have said and they have done. One after another, you are going to enter tunnels in your life. One after another, I and all of us will go through difficult times. But we have the great promise and the realization that the divine power of God is available to us to guide and direct us in these experiences. And so in the midst of your most difficult times, I'd invite you to remember when you were a child, to remember the time that you went into that tunnel, and remember that the lights came on and the horns honked and the darkness wasn't so frightening. And at the end of that dark time, there was a radiant light, and out of the dark tunnel you came into the radiance of illumination and divine light. That's the reality of your life and my life. That's the challenge that we have amid all of the circumstances and situations that we experience. And in the midst of it, we can thank God for all of the challenges that we have, because in going through the tunnels and in being pulled by the tugboats, we are guided and directed to be more empowered, stronger, more dynamic, successful, happy, and fulfilled children of God. We believe in prayer as a centering force, as an ability that we have to reflect upon the divine presence in our lives. And so at this point in the program, we'd like to pause for a few moments of prayer for reflection. Eternal God, we gather our hearts and minds together, thankful for the ability that we have to deal with the circumstances and challenges that face us. We open our conscious awareness to the tugboat experience and reality, and we claim your divine presence as that tugboat in our lives, steering us through the troubled waters of life. And we claim your divine presence in the illumination and light at the end of each tunnel. We claim this presence in the name of faith, in the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
That was a wonderful analogy of the tugboat and the tunnel in relation to the power of God's help and God's love in our lives.
Very common things, but I think we can relate to both of them. And sometimes we see our lives kind of like the tugboat. We see ourselves kind of like the tugboat, as unlovable and unattractive. But the value of that tugboat is very important, just as the value of all of us is very important.
Well, the value of the homely things in life are what is important. And as we connect those with the divine principle, then it's that much more meaningful, and it's meaningful to each of us.
Making the common divine is something that makes life a richer experience. So often I think we think of spirituality as something that is a mountaintop.
Yes, way out there beyond our reach. But no, and that's why that analogy is so wonderful, because it shows that it's right there, it's ever present. And it's in the most homely things of life, and it's in the most usual and then the most unusual. It's everywhere, all the time, ever present. There's been so many books and lectures about the tunnel of, when you talk about your mind, that, which has nothing to do with exactly with your lecture, but the people go through the tunnel when they go out in death. And I wondered if that's a vortex of energy or if indeed it is a tunnel.
Well, I think both. It is a reality. I think one of the things that people say about that tunnel is that it is also a recollection, or can be a recollection or recall of the birth experience. And that does not diminish in any way the reality of near-death experiences or the tunnel experience. But when we think about it, when we come into this life experience in the physical sense, we come through a tunnel as we come through the birth canal.
Indeed.
And that tunnel brings us into life. And then, of course, we go through tunnels of challenge and difficulty in life, and physical challenges through mountains as we travel. And then we go through a tunnel as we go back. And I believe it is both a vortex and a place.
Could be used as an analogy and reality.
True.
Combined. And so often that's true in life. And the spiritual often brings that very clear in our consciousness.
The tunnel that you talked about in terms of death is a big interest, I think, to people today.
Yes.
And those concepts that people have of the death experience. And I think that some of the information that we have today, some of the books and near-death accounts, bring people great solace and comfort in realizing that this death experience is really an experience like any other.
Yes, yes. And it's not to be feared. And it's to be, in fact, welcomed. And, of course, many people say, well, they only fear the pain before death. They don't really fear death, and that's a wonderful thing. I like it that you often refer to death in your lectures, because that's, I think it helps make people more aware that it's just a normal course of events.
We work very hard in our ministry to emphasize the reality of death. And I think that in New Thought, that is a tradition, not necessarily emphasizing the finality of this life experience in the death experience, but looking at all of the experiences that we have in life as being little deaths.
Yes.
And as we end a relationship, that's a death. As we give up a house, that's a death.
Right.
As we give up a job, that's a death. As we're guided to do new things, that's a death. And by accepting these things and moving through those tunnels, the death process becomes just a process of growing and going.
Yes. We do indeed, like that Bible scholar said, die daily. We die daily.
We need to die daily.
Yes.
Because if we don't die daily, we hold on to everything, and then everything becomes stale and stagnant, and we have no movement and no
And too
change.
overwhelming, and too vastly overwhelming. Well, there's so many books today about death that I think one reason for that, we know evolution is being stepped up, and we know we're given fresher and newer information all the time. It's whatsoever you shall ask in prayer, believing you shall receive, and it happens just that way. And there's so many wonderful books, Embraced by the Light, Saved by the Light, We Don't Die, and there's so many others that are just marvelous, and more people are reading them and talking about them, and it's wonderful too that they're even on the talk shows, those authors are, and giving out information to the multitudes of people who watch those shows.
And I think we're coming to, of course, the end of this age. We're moving into a new age. And as the planet accelerates through this change process, I believe that the people who are here on planet Earth at this point in time, not only Christians and people in the West, but all people, are shifting their consciousness, and the conscious thought is moving to spiritual values and not necessarily to traditional spiritual values. The different approaches and information that we have about death, the different view of angels and angelic beings, the spiritual dimension of our lives is becoming much deeper and is transcending the denominational or the faith tradition lines that we used to know so well on the entire planet.
Yes, it's obvious there is that paradigm shift, and it was necessary for our growth before we end this age, before we go in to the new millennium, the new age. And what is it? We need all the help we can get, and all people need that. But as you just said, all people are coming together more in a more cohesive way of thinking, and that's a wonderful thing.
Right, I think we're reaching a point now at the end of this age, this 2,000-year dispensation, where the teachings that Christ Jesus brought us are moving from the realm of simply being rote and taught into being action in people's minds and in their hearts. And it doesn't even have to do with people being Christian. It has to do with those Christ-like principles becoming dynamic in people's lives. And that is impacting the worldview of death, of spiritual issues, of angels, and the issues that we're talking about.
Yes, there's a big difference of having it just be an ideal and then living it. And that's what I hear you saying, that people are living that more today. And I know that I read that Gandhi had one picture in his hut, and that was a picture of the Lord Christ. And that was a wonderful thing, that he revered that great one in that way.
And I think we have millions and millions of people who intellectually understand the Christ-based teachings, but we can see from actions that the dynamic of putting those teachings into daily living is not necessarily a reality. And so we're seeing that shift of activity and that shift from simply intellect and thought and ideation into creation and into the manifestation in people's lives.
Yeah. And we can say that some of the tugboats are the books about angels, the information that's being given out in other ways, in lectures and so forth, and about near-death experiences and all the various facets of spiritual truths. that we have many tugboats on which to depend.
And the tugboats, too, are the wonderful spiritual leaders that we've had throughout the world.
Good
And
point.
the one that we know, of course, Christ Jesus,
Yes.
but other spiritual leaders. We're coming to a deeper understanding here in the West, certainly, of the Muslim tradition
Yes.
and Muhammad's teachings.
Yes.
And those of us who have been involved in New Thought and metaphysics have understood for a long time the Eastern traditions of Buddhism and Hinduism and those faith traditions and how they come together, and how all of our faith traditions and beliefs are really common when it comes right down to the fundamental teaching
Yes.
and the fundamental issues of life.
And the space between is far less than ever before and becoming smaller.
And I think we can see the tugboats, if we saw all of those spiritual leaders, if we saw Muhammad and Christ Jesus and Moses and
Lord Buddha.
Buddha all bringing their ships in as these wonderful and magnificent spiritual tugboats, bringing us into the harbor, that's a little bit of what we're seeing today. And we're all coming into the same harbor.
Yeah. It's such a wonderful time to be alive. And sometimes we lose sight of that fact because we think of all the terrible things that are happening and concentrate on those. But there's so much good, so much wonderful truth being revealed to us. And I think even just in meditation and prayer, people are, on an individual basis, people are getting more and more information. I see that so often, and I'm sure that you do too.
And we believe that, as we say so often, we live in our minds and not in the world. So if we live in the mentality of those negative vibrations, those negative thoughts, then the world for us becomes a negative place. But if we look at the world condition as unfolding and coming forth in a beautiful and magnificent way, then we really draw upon the positive aspects of and vibrations of thought, and our world becomes more positive.
Yes. And it changes as the vibrations change in our own parameter, then it changes in our city, in the state, in the country, in the world. So that's an important point to remember, that what as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And then we reflect out into the world, each of us do. And we each are important. Each person is important. And the thoughts we think and the vibrations we send out are part of the collective consciousness.
And that collective consciousness is a direct result, just as you said so beautifully, of individual vibration.
Yes.
And I don't think we think enough about vibration. Vibration is a word like substance. We talked about this last Sunday in church. But vibration is so fundamental to what we believe, because thoughts create vibration, sound creates vibration, feelings create vibration, emotion creates vibration, and it is the vibration that we are all sensitive to that funnels into the collective vibration that creates the environment for our entire planet. It's very important.
So important to remember, and to know that everything functions to a vibratory rate. The table, the flowers, the chair, our own bodies, everything, every aspect of life has its own vibratory rate. And together, those, as you said, make up the collective vibratory rate of the world. And each person is important. That can't be stressed enough, that the thoughts we think are so important to the world, to our world, and to the entire world.
And those thoughts, as they create vibration, are absorbed by all of us. And we've all had the experience of walking into a home and having either a very warm and welcome feeling or a very negative and cold feeling, or coming into a room, or coming into a business situation and finding a group of people who are in a very stressful and antagonistic environment. The vibration, just, you can feel it within the air.
They send out those strong energies like needles, and it's really not pleasant. And we can realize that when we are, and this is why it's important when we go out in crowds sometimes to deliberately close our aura and to just place our hand over our solar plexus and ask for protection and from the divine spirit. And it's very helpful in that way.
And be able to train our thoughts so that they are always moving in a positive vein to create a positive vibration. And then as we go out, as we're protected from absorbing those negative influences, we're sending forth a positive vibratory rate. And all those who come in contact with us then are touched by this positive vibration. And the weak negative aspects of vibration then are able to be moved aside, if you will, by the positive.
In a sense, it's a form of self-protection.
It is. It is self-protection and creativity from a divine and spiritual sense. But we need to really remember that that divine creative potential is also there for the negative influences.
Yes, yes. And if we can always remember that and stress it in our lectures and stress it in our counseling, and if others could just remember it always, then it makes for a different world. And I think that's happening. That is actually happening in the world. And when we hear all the negative things that happen have to occur because a certain karma has to be worked through. But we know that there's more light in the world today. There's more knowledge available to people, and people are seeking that knowledge. And so when we stress the negative, that's not good. When we say, oh, things are so bad, then that's not good, because things are not always that bad.
Mm-hmm. Right. Things are not always that bad. Things are changing. And as they change, good things happen.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we need to remember is that this planet and our lives are constantly going through periods of birth and death.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can think of the birthing process, it is a rather convulsive and painful experience, but out of it comes newness of life. And this planet is really going through a convulsive birth process right now. And during this decade and coming into the new century, which brings us into a new age, we are seeing the birthing of a new culture, a new consciousness, a new mentality, and a new vibratory rate. And that, of course, is going to create some conflict and strife, and it's definitely going to cause the putting aside of a lot of things that need to be put to death.
Very, very, very surely.
Yeah.
And as you said in the beginning of your lecture, change is always vitally necessary, and we have to have that change. And we need to welcome the change, not to fear it, not to just feel that it's negative, but to feel the positive aspect of it.
Right. Change is neither negative nor positive. Change is change, and life is change. And we need to always be in the midst of change, because when we cease to change, we probably are not alive anymore, and that's an important issue. Reverend Freelander and I have enjoyed sharing with you some ideas on truth and sharing with you some ideas of confident living. We look forward to being with you next time.
Confident living, banner of might, comes from the Spirit with glorious light. Confident living cleanses my soul, giving the Spirit fullest control. Confident living rights every wrong. Dynamic power helps me be strong. Confident living comforts my heart. From such a blessing I can't depart.